welcome. We apologize for the delay, but this is, as always, Mishnah in Depth Gittin, where we are continuing learning with Miss Leora Balinsky. And this is the second class in our ongoing series, sponsored in the memory of Rifka Rosenwein. And if you haven't had the pleasure of learning with Mrs. Balinsky, she's great. I highly recommend. And I want to hand things over very quickly to her.
Thank you, Kayla, so much. Thank you for dealing with your technical difficulties with aplomb. I'm glad we're all here and we all made it in. Great to see some familiar faces from last time and just from life. And I'm looking forward to learning these mishnayot together. This week, we are looking at the end of the first parak of Gittin and all the way until about the middle of the second parak of Gittin. And I wanted to start off with just a very brief review of some of the principles that we looked at last week that will hopefully allow us to be more anchored in our learning this week. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. I want to first refresh for those who were here last week, us in the foundational pasuk that teaches us all of the Doraita laws that we have regarding the way that the divorce process works. And that is from Parshat Kitetze, Perek Kafdala, the first pasuk, where we have the words Ki kach ish isha uve'ala v'haya im lo timtza chen be'einav ki matzava ervat davar v'chatav la sefer kritut v'natan be'yada v'shilcha mi beito. So when a man takes a woman and becomes her husband, and if he doesn't find, and it will be that if she doesn't find favor in his eyes, because he finds something unseemly in her, we'll talk about that definition later on of what unseemly means, what ervat davar means, then he will write for her this book of separation, this book of divorce, Venatan Beidan will put it in her hands, and he will send her from his home. And so I want us to look again at the Rambam here, where the Rambam tells us the laws that are derived from this pasuk, all of them, and all of them are derived from really pluming the depths of these psukim to understand each word as being imbued with a lot of significance. So the Rambam tells us that there are these 10 principles. The first is that a husband has to be divorced, can only get divorced according to his own will. The second is that he must divorce his wife in writing and not in anything else. The third, and we'll kind of relate to that today. The third is that the document has to actually communicate that the inyan ktav, the matter of the document, has to be communicating that he is divorcing his wife. The fourth is that the get itself, the words itself, will be that which separates him and her. That which is the act of separation is through this written document. We'll actually relate to that as well today. The fifth is that it should be written for her, lishma, specifically in her name for her. We'll also talk about that. The sixth, that lo yeh mechusar ma'aseh achar ktivato, that after writing it, there shouldn't be anything else that is done to it except for giving it to her. The seventh is that he should give it to her or to an emissary of hers, or through an emissary of his, that also works. 8, that he should give it to her in front of Edim. 9, that he should give it to her as a divorce document. And 10, that it should either be him who gives it or his emissary, as I referenced above. So these are the principles, and have those in mind as we explore the mishnayot today. I am now going to open up what we're going to be looking at today. One second. I'm actually going to stop sharing for a moment and just get this open. One moment. Let's see. Okay. Great. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, wonderful. Is this readable to people? Is it large enough? Yeah?
We can enlarge it by pinching it.
Okay. I can also enlarge it a bit. How's that? Okay.
Fine.
It's okay, great. So I just also wanted to mention the thesis of the article by Dr. Brodsky that we looked at last week that discussed the form, the structure of Masachet Gittin, of the Mishnayot as a whole, and where he discussed that the part of what the structure of the Masachet is doing is really trying to hammer home the point that there are certain situations in which things start off the way that they should. Things start off all hunky-dory and dandy, and then there's a certain time period, something comes about, and we need to create change. We need to sort of see what we have in the past and realize that it's no longer working, and then create change for the future and enact some sort of change. And that we see that in the middle of the Masachet when it comes to all of the matters and there were rabbinic enactments for the sake of tikkun olam, for the sake of repairing the world, because something in the way that things were being conducted wasn't working so well. And we also see that the paradigm of that is divorce, that they got married, things weren't working out perfectly, and then so a change needed to be made, and so they needed to get divorced. And I want to have that in mind as well as we look at this batch of Mishnayot. And I also just want to have that structural methodology in mind of trying to analyze the Mishnayot structurally as a whole, of looking at, okay, even within the whole Masachet and also within individual prakim, what is the Mishnah doing? Why is it structured in this way? So with all that in mind, let's get into the meat of what we're going to be talking about today. What I first want to do is, what we have here is the format of a get. This is what a get looks like. And I think we should read it, familiarize ourselves with it a bit, and then talk about two components of it. I will read it in Aramaic. Can I have a volunteer afterwards to read it in English? Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. I see you. Okay, awesome. So I'll read in Aramaic first. Blank b'Shabbat, blank yamim leyarach blank, shnat blank, livriyat olam, liminyan sha'anu monin kan blank, mata diatva al nahar blank. Ve'almei mayanot, ana ploni ben ploni, ha'omed hayom blank mata, diatva al nahar blank, ve'almei mayanot, tzvite berut nafshi, v'delo anisna, V'shavkit upatrit utruchit yatechi lechi ant intati plonit bat ploni haomedet hayom blank mata diyapel nahar blank ve'alme mayanot dahavit intati min kadant dana v'chadu patrit v'shavkit v'truchit yatechi lechi ditvayun risha shlita'a benafshaychi lemeach lehitnesaba b'chol gavar de yit yatzvan ve'anash lo yimcha b'daychi min yoma denan ule'alam ve'are at muter l'chol adam v'dan diyehevi lechi manai sefer truchin v'girat shvukin v'get pturin kedat Moshe Israel ploni ben ploni aid. Deborah, take it away.
Okay, on the blank day of the week, the blank day of the month, and of blank in the year, blank after a year, whatever the year is after the creation of the world, according to the calendric calculations that we count here in the city of, which is situated on this river and situated near springs of water, I, Ploni, the son of Almoni, who today am present in the city of, which is situated on this river and situated near springs of water, willingly consent, being under no duress, to release, discharge, and divorce you to be on your own, you, my wife, Plonit, the daughter of Almonit, who are today in the city of blank, which is situated on thus river and situated near springs of water, who has hitherto been my wife. And now I do release, discharge, and divorce you to be on your own, so that you are permitted and have authority over yourself to go and marry any man you desire. No person may object against you from this day onward, and you are permitted to every man. This shall be for you from me a bill of dismissal, a letter of release, a document of absolution in accordance with the laws of Moshe and Israel, and then 2 witnesses.
Thank you very much. So what we see from this document is that there is zero ambiguity with regard to what the purpose of this document is, with regard to what it's doing. This is divorce. It's full divorce. She is free to marry whoever she pleases. She's free to any man. This is a full separation. And I also want to note that there is a part that's full of blanks, and there's another part that actually has some content. And so these parts have two distinct names. The former part, you see my cursor, yeah?
Yes.
So the former part, up until roughly, up until here, this is what is referred to as the toref. Then the latter part until here, until after the blanks, that is referred to as the tofes. Tofes means a form or a formula or a blank document. And so this is the part that you could write for everyone, right? This part is not unique to a particular couple. And the toref is the part that is obviously you have to fill in your own personal details. And the distinction between these parts has potential halachic implications, which we will also relate to in the mishnayot of today. I do want to note that according to Shmuel and the Gemara, in addition to the former part, the upper part being part of the toref, this line here, v'harei, oops, that did not do what I intended to do, but did I just move it? No, we're good. Okay. This line here, v'harei at muteret l'chol adam, that line is, and behold, you are now permitted to any person, to any man. That line is also part of the Torah, part of what is considered to be the unique part. Yes, Deborah.
Please feel free to tell me not to ask these questions now. But first, what's the shoresh of the word toref? Is it a tet or a taf?
Great question. Both. So it's commonly written with a tuf, but it's the same word as with a tet, which we see happens sometimes. And it comes from the word toref, meaning the word means to tear. It can also mean to seize. And so
Toraf Yosef. Yeah.
Okay. We got the biblical reference. So the seizure of it is when you were talking about not a get, but when we're talking about other documents, like when we're talking about a loan or something, that is the element that allows you to seize something, meaning if like seize assets, whatever, and therefore that is then from that is then considered the part that is binding, as opposed to the tofes, which is just the standard language.
We use today in Hebrew a tfasim, or forms that you have to fill out. That's
exactly.
Still used in standard Hebrew today.
Yeah. Very much so. As an Ola, I'm familiar with way too many tfasim and having to understand what the heck they all mean, and they all have numbers and they don't correspond to anything in reality. But yes.
But the tofes here is the part that doesn't need to be filled out, and the toref is the part that does. So it's not yeah.
Yeah, so if you think of it one-to-one, it doesn't necessarily jive so well.
We use the term, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess it has to do with what is the form that is not unique to the person. That's what's the same for all of them. That's what it's talking about, as opposed to what is distinctive to the person. That's the toref, right? That's how I would distinguish between the two.
I think that's a way of thinking about it that also allows it to adhere to how we think about it now as well. So this is the structure of a get. Maybe in the future we could actually put up a picture of one that we have from various time periods. It's difficult because they're torn after they're given. So I saw one picture of a get that the reason that it was basically declared possible because it was missing one word. It was missing the word lechi. For you all on your own. So we might look at that in a future week. But this is what a get is. We have the tofes and the toref. Again, tofes, generic part, toref, the part that you actually have to fill in. So what I wanted to do now is just have a bit of an overview of what was discussed in these mishnayot. Debbie, is that a hand? No. Okay, great. Also, if I don't see your hand and you're raising your hand, please say something or do the formal hand thing. Hopefully I'll see that. If I don't see that, please tell me because I'm not ignoring you on purpose. And I'll also try to, there's Rachel. If you think of filling out forms, if you think of form letter. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so what I have on the sheet here is just all of the Mishnah that we're going to look at. We're not going to read all of them in depth. I just want to give us an idea of what we're talking about here for those both who aren't necessarily actually following along every day, and for those who are, just to give us a sort of integration of the Mishnah that we've been learning for the past week. I can't believe that a week has passed already. Shavuos really, especially for those in Chutz La'aretz who had 2 days of Yontif, I'm sure. But somehow we're a week later with a week more of mishnayot that we have learned. So we jumped off the discussion at the end of the first parak, which pointed out that there were similarities between the ways that you have to give an emancipation document for slaves and the way that you have to give a divorce document for women. So drawing a comparison between the two of them. The last two mishnayot in the first parak, which we have on the page here, those continue fleshing out similarities as well as differences, which we're not going to get into today. If anyone wants to talk about them after class, email me. Great. Would love to talk about it. They're two very interesting mishnayot. And then when we get to the second parak, we sort of go back to where we were before. So we started off the first parak talking about the case of Hamevi get Midinat Hayam, that a person who brings a get, an emissary brings a get from overseas to a woman to deliver it to her, that he has to say the words b'fanai nechtav u'b'fanai nechtam, that he has to say that it was written in my presence and signed in my presence. And then we talked about why it gave we offered different conditions, and now the second parak is going right back there, and it gives all these, and we're not going to get into the meat of these at all, but it gives all these different scenarios of what if they only said half of it? What if, and which half? What if you only saw, the emissary only saw half of it being signed or half of it being written? What if it was two people saw one part, another person saw another part? This is a fairly complicated matter in the Gemara, and the Gemara expounds a lot and is sort of redefining the rules here in ways that we wouldn't necessarily expect. Another very interesting thing that I wish we had actual time to get into. And if anyone wants to talk about that, email me as well. And then the second Mishnah discusses more conditions of, okay, we are writing it, but things aren't fully aligned. So that's what we have again. The first Mishnah is things aren't fully, I'd say, balanced. You say one part, you don't say the other part. Two people said this, one person said this. There's something that's not fully balanced or aligned. And we have that also in the second Mishnah, where we talk about a situation where it was written what happens if it's written in the daytime but signed afterwards. So we have the case here by Yom v'nechtam b'layla. It was written during the day and it was signed at night. It is pasul. That's what the Tanna Kama says. That's what the first opinion in the Mishnah says. Rabbi Shimon disagrees because Rabbi Shimon thinks that the only reason that this matters is because of the problem of predated documents, which have implications when there is direct financial consequences of the document being written as being about a certain time. So, for example, if you say that a debt is due at a certain point, if it's written that it's due during the day, but it wasn't actually signed until the nighttime, and it's due, let's say, 30 days after that, then that will cause a discrepancy of a day. But that doesn't apply when we're talking about divorce documents for women. But I want to just note here that these two mishnayot that we start off with share in common that there's some sort of imbalance between the way that the Mishnah was written and the way that it was signed, or the way that it was presented, something along those lines. And now we see a maneuver in the third and fourth Mishnah to talking about how the get was actually written. And these are the Mishnayot. We're going to be focusing on the third and fourth Mishnah, these two. We're going to be focusing on those later in the shiur as well. And we're going to go a little bit more in depth there, but we're talking about the materials that the Mishnah, I keep on saying Mishnah, that the get needs to be written with. And we're also talking about what materials can the get be written on. So we're going to come back to these later.
One question I just want to highlight in chat that came up in chat while
thank you.
Point. This is from Rachel Bloch saying, quote, in English we think of filling out forms, but if you think of a form letter, it aligns with the definition of tarif that you gave like 5 minutes ago.
Thank you, Kayla. Yeah. Thank you, Rachel. Great. Do we know when the language of the get became standard? I just saw that now. That is a really good question. I'm sure we know. I personally do not know off the top of my head. Does anyone else know? I assume that it comes out of that is standardized in the Gemara. That's an assumption. Don't know
Yeah,
that
no,
for
I haven't studied. I am not even up to the end of the set of mishnayot, but I was wondering if there's a Mishnah that says the hare hamilim elu, or no.
So yeah, those details to like that precise level, no, do not come out of the Mishnayot. But I'm assuming that they are like specified out in the Gemara.
It's just an interesting thing that the Mishnah is concerned about the form of, meaning the get must be written not in this material, but in that material, but hasn't yet presented to us what is the text.
What is actually being written? Absolutely, absolutely. Like we're really like form versus matter here. We're looking at the form. We're very concerned about the form, the toe face stump. But in a sense, yes, like we're concerned about the form of what's happening as opposed to the specific content. And so we see the materials that, again, the get can be written with in terms of like what ink can it be written with, inks and dyes, and then the materials that can be written on. And we're going to return to those. Those are fun to me. And then in the...
excuse me, at one point it said
Please.
it could be written on the hand of a slave.
Oh, yes, it does. Yeah, we're going to get back to that.
Okay.
Yeah. Debbie, I'm glad that the same thing seemed to catch both of our eyes here. So then we move on in the 5th and 6th Mishnah to, I skipped, so sorry. Ooh. Here we go. No, I just have, this is in the wrong order on the sheet right now. Okay. Let's fix that. One moment. Good thing that I'm on the Sefaria version. Okay. I have these again. Okay, great. So I will just say we don't have to have them in front of us because I guess I didn't put them in front of us. That what we are looking at in the 5th Mishnah is about who can write the get and also who can be the shaliach who can be the agent for the get. And it seems like the common denominator that we have there is that our only concern is people who have a lack of da'at, which I guess we could so we're concerned about someone who is a deaf mute who is perceived as someone who's da'at. We weren't sure if they had da'at, which I will translate da'at as maybe mental competence. I think that's a solid translation. So people were concerned that a deaf mute didn't have that people were concerned that a shota, someone who was experiencing a bout of insanity, did not have that, and also a child. It seems like the get can be the issue is with the delivery of the get being in the hands of people who do not have full mental competence and don't have full knowledge of what they're doing. And the 6th Mishnah continues from that thread and talks about how basically if you are in a scenario where when a person got the get, they had full they were fully mentally competent, they were fully aware, and then something happened to them, but by the time they delivered the get, they were back to their previous state of mental competence, then it's okay. And they say this is the rule that anything that it is kosher as long as tchilato v'sofo b'dat. That as long as the beginning and the end is with this mental competence, then it's okay. And when I was reading that, I personally was wondering if this is also a sort of reference to the beginning and end of the marriage as well, maybe, which is interesting because it's not actually true, bottom line halacha wise, that a person halakhically nowadays we try to have every single party having full awareness and full consent to both getting married and also to getting divorced. But bottom line halacha in the time of Chazal does not necessarily reflect that it seems like it is possible for a husband to get married against his will, just like it's possible to basically force any type of acquisition on a person. It is impossible for a woman to be married against her will because of a takana of Chazal. And then in terms of divorce, the man has to consent to do so, but the woman doesn't need to. We see there's a takana Rabbeinu Gershom that a woman also does need to consent. So it's interesting to think of the beginning and the end being with dot, the beginning and the end both being with consent. Maybe that is being proposed as some sort of ideal. I don't know. That's just a suggestion that I'm throwing out. And then the final Mishnah of the second parak, and I apologize again, I don't have it in front of us right now, is that when we say that anyone is able to bring a get, except for the deaf mute, the cherish, the shota, the temporarily insane person, and the katan, the child, that even includes women who are not trusted in other scenarios, whose testimony is not trusted in other scenarios, which is discussed in Masachet Yevamot. So that's the second parak. Then the third parak, we move on to another principle of Gittin, which is the principle of lishma that we also referenced in the halachot that we reviewed at the beginning, which is that a get has to be written for the woman for her sake. And I love this scenario that is described here, which someone is walking through the shuk and they see the sofrim who are the scribes who are presumably practicing writing with specific names, and they say a name and he's like, oh, that happens to be my name and that is my wife's name. He cannot use that get in order to divorce his wife because it wasn't written for him. And then we get to even more and more specific scenarios, including where if a get was written for one of his wives, but he has two wives with the exact same name and also with the same parent's name, even in that scenario, he has to use it he can only use a get for the wife that it was specifically written for. We then see the second Mishnah, where we get in the Mishnah Bet of the third parak, where we have now a reference to the tofes versus the torif. This Mishnah only uses the word tofes, but the Tanakam of the Mishnah assumes that when you write the tofes of a get, you can do so. Basically, you can write a get, the tofes, the form part of a get, not specific to a woman, but you just have to leave the proper place. You have to leave the proper space for the torif to come in. They don't use the word torif. The Rashi uses the word torif, I believe. Rabbi Elazar, however, says that doesn't actually work with a get, because v'chatav la lishma, you have to write the entire thing for her, including the tofes. It all has to be written for her. And we say that the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar, that the entire get has to be written for her. And then we now move on to talking about scenarios in which we aren't sure that things are, and this lasts us through this is now, okay. These are all in the wrong order right now, but that is okay. Okay, here we go. Let's fix that. Okay. What we see now is an extension. Sorry, let's just go back to where we were supposed to be. I didn't actually mean to include all of these, but it's great. Where we see the theme of these mishnayot is a situation in which some time passes between the get being written and the get being given, and we question whether things remained the same in that time period. And we extend that to other principles as well. So do we assume that a person who is sick, do we assume that they're still alive or not? Do we assume that a person who is on their deathbed, do we assume that they in fact have died? If we're in a scenario, and this is in Mishnah Daled now, where there are besiegers surrounding a city, do we assume that they are alive or not at this point? So we have all these questions of, in these certain scenarios, what do you assume about the status of these people when you're not immediately next to them? Which I think is also a very interesting discussion, and also thinking about how perhaps this relates to Gittin as a whole. And in terms of things not always staying static, and in terms of things sometimes being open to change, perhaps. So that is a summary of these mishnayot. And now I want us to get into the meat of what I want to discuss today, the real meat of it. I've already said that already, that we're getting into the meat of it. Now we're getting into the basar shel basar of today, which is looking at the third and fourth Mishnah of the second parak, where we have a switch again from we're starting off the second parak, talking about more details with regard to b'fanai nichtav, b'fanai nechtam, in terms of making that statement, in terms of how what the shaliach says with regard to when he brings the get from overseas. And now we are moving on to talking about how the get is actually written. So let's get into a little bit of this. So let's just make sure that I have everything here. Good. So I actually, no, let's read these two mishnayot first. Okay. Would anyone like to read the Hebrew, and would anyone like to read the English? No pressure.
I can read the Hebrew if you want.
Great. Hi, Sigal. Thank you. Great. Would anyone like to read the English? I can read the English. Okay. Thank you,
I can read
Sigal.
the English too. That's fine.
Okay, great, Debbie. Thank you.
Okay. בכל כותבין, בדיו, בסם, בסקרה, ובקומוס, ובקנקנתום, ובכל דבר שהוא של קיימה. אין כותבים לא במשקים ולא במי פירות, ולא בכל דבר שאינו מתקיים. על הכל כותבין, על העלה של זית ועל הקרן של פרה, ונותן לה את הפרה. על יד של עבד ונותן לה את העבד. רבי יוסי הגלילי אומר, אין כותבים לא על דבר שיש בו רוח חיים, ולא על האוכלים.
Thank you. Oh, Debbie, you're on mute.
Sorry.
There we go.
One may write a bill of divorce with any material that can be used for writing, with geo, ink, with paint, sam, with sikra, red pigment, with komos, gum, with kankatom, copper sulfate, or with anything that produces permanent writing. However, one may not write with other liquids, nor with fruit juice, nor with anything that does not produce permanent writing. Similarly, with regard to the document itself, one may write on anything, even on an olive leaf or on the horn of a cow, and the latter is valid if he gives her the entire cow. Likewise, one may write a bill of divorce on the hand of a slave, and that is valid if he gives her the slave. Rabbi Yossi Aglili disagrees and says one may not write a bill of divorce on any living thing, nor may it be written on food.
Okay, thank you both. So we see, right, two topics here. We start off with the writing material, or the ink material, and then we go on to what it's actually written on. We're gonna get into the slave and cow case shortly, but first let's also read this fourth Mishnah Dalet. If Sigal and Debbie, if you're willing to reprise your roles, that would be wonderful.
אין כותבים במחובר לקרקע. כתבו במחובר, תלשו וחתמו ונתנו לה, כשר. רבי יהודה פוסל, עד שתהא כתיבתו וחתימתו, בתלוש. רבי יהודה בן בתרה אומר, אין כותבים לא על הנייר המחוק ולא על הדפתרה, מפני שהוא יכול להזדייף, וחכמים מכשירים.
Thank you.
One may not write a bill of divorce on anything that is attached to the ground. If one wrote it on something that was attached to the ground and afterward he detached it, signed it, and gave it to her, then it is valid. Rabbi Yehuda deems a bill of divorce invalid unless it is writing and its signing were performed when it was already detached. Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera says one may not write a bill of divorce on erased paper or on unfinished letter, diphthera, because writing on these surfaces can be forged. And the rabbis deem valid a bill of divorce that was written on either of these items.
Okay, thank you. So I want to first look at these two mishnayot together. And I think that what we see here in both mishnayot is that the the Tanakama, the anonymous opinion, and the opinion of the Chachamim, both seem to be more lenient with regard to the material that a get can be written on. And it seems like there is a more nonchalant attitude, even if we're talking about writing it on these unconventional objects. And it also seems like maybe, and I'm not, this is just like the beginning of a claim. I mean, it's not even, it's a suggestion. I'm not even sure, but that within the Chachamim, there is less anxiety about the possibility of those items changing. There being some kind of concern of things changing, perhaps. Whereas if we look at Rabbi Yossi Haglili's opinion, for example, in the third Mishnah, he is concerned specifically and then we'll talk about how the Gemara sort of maybe shift this a bit. He's concerned specifically about this Ruach Chaim matter and also not on food, where it seems like the concern there is something having the potential to maybe decompose or wither away, and thereby you don't have it to prove anymore. Whereas the Chachamim seem less concerned about that for whatever matter. And we also see that in Mishnah Daled with Rabbi Yehuda ben Teira says you can't write on material that is on a material that's already erased and then thus could presumably be erased again, get all smudgy, or also on unfinished leather where the language doesn't look so clear. And the Chachamim say, Machshirin, it's okay. So I think there is some sort of dynamic there with these individual Tanaim coming in and saying, I'm actually worried about this and this and this, and the Chachamim saying, yeah, we're okay. So I just want to throw that out there. And I actually want to look at the fourth Mishnah and the Gemara on the fourth Mishnah before we get back into the third Mishnah. What I think is interesting is if we look at the first two lines of the fourth Mishnah, how do you understand the relationship between the line in kotvinu b'mechubar lakarka and the second line, Ktavo b'mechubar tzlasho v'chatamo unetanola kasher? In English, one may not write a bill of divorce on anything that is attached to the ground. If one wrote it on something that was attached to the ground and afterward he detached it, signed it, and gave it to her, then it is valid. How do you understand the relationship between those two lines?
Well, if it's not attached anymore, it's not alive.
And therefore
it can't change, or you're freezing it at that point. So then it's not alive anymore. So hopefully whatever processes could change it are stopped.
So you're kind of seeing this Mishnah as an extension of Rabbi Yossi Haglili's voice, which is about the alive matter.
Living thing. Yeah.
And the fact that it says that you don't do it on things that are attached to the ground, but then you do it and you unattach it, is it telling us like a way of, what's the second line communicating to us in relationship to that first line?
That it agrees that it can't be a living thing.
Okay, so it's just a further agreement. It's saying you can't write it when it's attached. Once you detach it, then you don't have a problem.
Right.
Yeah. Sigal?
Maybe it's milchatchila and b'diavad.
That's another approach, right? Which is also, those are compatible approaches too. That milchatchila, you shouldn't write in something that is attached to the ground. But if you do, then you don't have a problem. And as long as you then detach it and then sign it. So when reading this Mishnah on its own, I think I read it more as lechatchila and b'diavad, as what you should do. I forgot what the fancy words for lechatchila and b'diavad in English. If anyone remembers them, please tell me. Ab initio, is that it?
Ab initio and ex post facto, but
yes. Okay, there we go. Ab initio. I always mix it up with a fortiori, which is kal v'chomer. So, I also read it that same way, and Debbie, I read mechubar lakarka as the concern there being something that can't be moved. Less is about it being alive, and more is something that is importable. Whereas, and that maybe that's the animating concern there. So if we look at the Gemara understands that these opinions are actually contradicting each other. Or maybe they say that we can see these Gemaras contradicting each other and then learn more from this contradiction. So the Gemara says, Tavo al mechubar v'amarta Reisha in kotvin. That seems like they see it, right? Not as we saw it, as something that's actually compatible is a full contradiction. If you say you can't write on a chubar lakarka, that means that you can't do it at all. What gives? Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Vahu Sheshir Makom Ha Toref. So he says no. The difference between them is that you cannot write it when it's attached to on something that's attached to the ground. When you are writing the entire bill of the divorce, when you're writing both the tofes and the torif, but when you're writing it, when you only write the tofes, that's when you're able to then write the tofes, take it off, write the torif, and then you're good. So we see also that I think we see in this Gemara that we are almost perhaps narrowing the gaps between the Chachamim, the opinion of the Chachamim and the opinion of these individual rabbis who disagree, perhaps, and that we are saying that you can't just write it, you can't just write any part on any material. It has to be, you can only write maybe you can in this scenario at least, the tofes is okay, but the torif is not. So now I want us to go back to the third Mishnah, and specifically we're going to focus on the matter of writing on a horn of a cow. And then, as the Mishnah instructs us to do, if you write on the horn of the cow, you then give the woman the entire cow. And before we get into the Gemara there, I want us to go down to has anyone familiar with Punch magazine? Has anyone read Punch magazine? So Punch magazine, Kayla, yeah?
Yeah, the British satire magazine.
Yes, the British satire magazine. So the British satire magazine, The Punch, which ran from, I think, not The Punch, no one can get mad at me, from, I think, 1841 until 2002. I hadn't heard of it until I encountered this, but now I know everything about it. So it's a humorous satire magazine, and one of the articles that was posted in it, written by A.P. Herbert, Sir Alfred Patrick Herbert, is about a fake court case involving something that is very familiar to us, which we'll see. So would anyone be willing to read this English block of text? Perry, sorry, I just saw yes. Oh, you sent it now. Perfect. That seems to be the concern, right? If something that's attached to the ground, then you can't actually give it. You can't, if it's still attached to the ground, you can't give it to her. And then the Gemara also understands that simply detaching it isn't sufficient. It needs to basically be, the Mishnah too, it needs to be signed when it's already no longer attached to the ground. It needs to be in some sort of same state. If no one wants to read it, I'm also happy to, you know what? Maybe it's actually better in interest of time. Oh, Kayla, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, it's Rachel.
Oh, sorry. I saw Kayla's hand. Never mind. Rachel, hello.
Sorry.
Rachel, Kayla's indicating me that you were raising your hand. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, like if part of it can't be rooted in the ground was like about intention, that if you write it when something is attached to the ground, it's sort of like, is there some ambiguity about what you're really, like maybe it's a little draft, like an email you're not going to hit send on.
Yeah.
It was also curious if I didn't think that they thought of plants as like having ruach hayim exactly. Like if just when the discussion of whether the thing being in the ground without it being a big thing.
Yeah. So I think that when Rabbi, I think I agree with you. I think, and that when Rabbi Yossi Glili, when he's referring to ruach hayim, he's referring to the slave and the cow, and when he's referring to ocholin, he's referring to the olive leaf. Also, okay. Yeah. Did you also want to read, or you just want to ask the question?
Oh,
you don't have to. No pressure. No.
I just wanted to ask the question.
Great. I'm so glad you asked it. So I will just summarize this. Actually, no, I'll read it. Why not? The case involved a Mr. Albert Haddock, often an ingenious litigant in Herbert's writing. In this case, Haddock, so this is a summary. I took this from Wikipedia. Don't worry, I verified it in other places. This was shorter. In this case, Haddock had been in disagreement with the collector of taxes over the size of his tax bill. Haddock complained that the sum was excessive, particularly in view of the inadequate consideration he believed that he received from that government in service. Eventually, the collector demanded 57 pounds and 10 shillings. I hope that is a pound symbol.
Yes.
Great. Haddock appeared at the offices of the collector of taxes and delivered a white cow of malevolent aspect. On the cow, it was stenciled in red ink. So the London and Literary Bank Limited paid the collector of taxes, who was no gentleman or order, the sum of 57 pounds, and may he rot, Albert Haddock. Okay, so rather than he was so upset that rather than giving a normal check, he essentially tried to write a check on the cow. And then there was a hearing about this whole scenario where the collector declined the cow, objecting that it would be impossible to pay it into a bank account. Haddock suggested that he endorse the cow to a third party to whom he might owe the money, adding that there must be many persons in that position. Sir Joshua informed the court that the collector did try to endorse the check on its back, in this case on the abdomen. However, Sir Joshua explained, the cow appeared to resent endorsement and adopted a menacing posture. This is a very, it's a very, very funny piece where we see basically a case that is similar to the case that's mentioned in our Gemara, in our Mishnah. And then part of the argument is also a check, he argues, could be written on notepaper, but he'd also drawn checks on the backs of menus, on napkins, on handkerchiefs, and on labels of wine bottles, and all those checks have been duly honored, right? So he's being very Talmudic about this, where he's saying it doesn't just have to be on a notebook. It could potentially be on other things as well. And just then, what is the spectrum of what is allowed and what is not? What is legitimate, what is not? What this case, again, fictitious, it's written in this, it's in this satiric journal, was then actually cited in real law cases by people who did not seem to know that this was fictitious, and it's referenced often. And this does not particularly add to our discussion today, but I could not share it with you all. So now getting back to our matter, where I think that the way that Rabbi Yossi Haglili is understood in the Gemara is actually like those who would argue against Haddock's decision to bring the cow, where the Gemara understands the machloket between the Tanakama, the Chachamim, and Rabbi Yossi Haglili a little bit differently than I've framed it before, where before I framed it as Rabbi Yossi Haglili potentially being concerned about things withering away. Here we don't see that in the same way. And actually I didn't bring it at all, so I'll just say this outside, where Rabbi Yossi Haglili, it's not a actual concern, it's just that's what the pasuk says, where he understands the word sefer kritut as meaning it has to be it has to be an actual sefer, similar to those who would argue against Haddock, that it has to be an actual notebook that he's writing his check on, and not a cow, or even not a wrapper like he was talking about, or a menu or anything like that. That doesn't work. Here we are talking about Rabbi Yossi Haglili says that it's sorry, I just lost my train of thought because I saw the chat, where Rabbi Yossi Haglili, according to the Gemara, just understands that Sefer is a Gzeirat HaKatuv. It's something that the pasuk says. It has to be a literal book. The Chachamim disagree because they think if that were the case, it would have said Ba Sefer, in the scroll. And the fact that it just says Sefer allows for more interpretation. Nathan, can you tell me what your question is referencing? Oh, wait, you cannot speak because I think you are.
I've unmuted you.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'm trying to remember what it was. It was something earlier where you asked us how he viewed the case, and you said that you viewed it at first as the chachila and b'diavad, but then was there another way of understanding it?
Good, thank you. So that was referencing the fourth Mishnah about ein kotvin b'mechubar lakarka, but katvu b'mechubar tzlasho v'chatamo natanola kasher. So you can't write on something that is attached to the ground, but if you do so, then you can cut it off and then sign it, and you give it to her, it's kosher. So we understood that as potentially lechachila or b'diavad, whereas the Gemara understand that as in kofin mechubar lekarka, the entire get, but kadvu b'mechubar, that's referring to the tofes but not the toref. And now in our discussion of the Gemara, we are looking at the third Mishnah regarding the slave and the cow. So let's look briefly at this Gemara. Al haleshel zayit v'chule. Bishlama yad de'eved la efshar lemiksaya. So it makes sense that you are not able to cut off it's impossible to cut off the hand of the slave. So that's our assumption. And then the Gemara asks, Ela keren shel para liktsaya v'lifila. Why don't you just cut off the horn of the cow, leave behind the whole cow, and give her the horn? Why does the Mishnah say that you should transfer over the entire cow? That's the Gemara's question. I just want to note that in terms of the Eved, it's not only that that you are not that cutting off the Gemara's assumption doesn't seem to be, at least according to the Mepharshim, that cutting off a person's hand is wrong, right? That would seem obvious to us, is that you can't cut off a human's hand. Their assumption is more that it is that it's forbidden to, it's like halakhically forbidden to harm your slave like this. And if you do so, then this is where we go, if you harm the slave like this, then they go free. If they go free, their hand belongs to them. And therefore, you wouldn't be able to hand over the hand to the woman. This is how Rashi explains it. You can't hand over the hand because it's his hand. So the fact that the get is written on the hand, that wouldn't work. But great. We understand the overall idea that you can't write the get on the hand. You can't cut off the hand of a slave and then give the woman the hand and leave the rest of the slave behind. And so now they ask about what a cow, why can't you do that? And now we say, okay, it's not just a matter of logic, actually. We're going to take it to the point of a pasuk. Amar kra v'chatav v'natan la. Mi she'eno mechusar ela ktiva unatina. Yatsa zeh shemechusar ktiva ktzitza unatina. So this language of mechusar, she'eno mechusar ela ktiva unatina, we saw this in the Rambam discussing the halachot of how you have to write a get. It says the same halacha, meaning that you need to, it's strange language, but it refers to is that the only things that you can do to this with the get are writing it and giving it, and there isn't supposed to be anything else. However, when we are talking about this act of cutting something, then there's an additional thing in, and that's not what the pasuk refers to. The pasuk says v'chatav v'natan, v'chatav la Sefer Kritut, v'natan la. So we can only have these actions of chatav and natan, of writing and giving. We can't have anything else in between. And so ktsitza, the act of cutting something, the act of cutting, that isn't included. That doesn't work. Does it make sense what I just said? People, okay, great. So we can only have the ktiva and the natina, and that's why Tzitza is a problem. I just want to relay that back to our fourth Mishnah. Then we can understand now, according to the Gemara's read, how the third and fourth Mishnah are maybe perhaps more connected than we thought they were, which is the reason why you have to hand over the whole slave, and why you have to hand over, why you have to hand over the whole cow, is because you can't have this act of tzitza in the middle, and therefore also you can't write on something that is mechubar lakarka, and finish writing it fully, and sign it and everything, and then have the act of tlisha, of cutting it off, of ktsitza, of ripping it up from the ground, and then giving it to someone else, because that would be a similar forbidden action. So through the lens of the Gemara, we see that underlying there might be more connections between the third and fourth Mishnah of Perek Bet than we thought. But in addition to that, what I think we can see here is that what the get, as we saw, is supposed to be the thing that separates between the husband and the wife. And maybe part of the reason, in addition to the fact that it's a gzerat hakatuv, that the Torah says v'katav v'natan, maybe an additional concern with cutting off this cow's horn and then handing her the horn and keeping the cow for you, is that we have a problem where you might think that it's that symbolic act of severance, that act of cutting the cow, that is divorcing the wife, as opposed to the get itself. You might think that it's this symbolic action where we're dividing this cow, giving you part, giving me part, and then maybe that is actually what's separating us, as opposed to the get itself. And so therefore,
me.
Yeah.
Can I ask you? But if we're saying that it has to be written in something permanent, right? If you write it on somebody's hand, it's not permanent. There's nothing permanent about writing it on a slave's hand. Whether you keep the slave or don't keep the slave.
Yeah.
I just don't understand the logic in that. On a horn, I imagine it is permanent, but not on a hand. No matter what you use.
But the slave and the animal are seemingly the same type for the rabbis, right? Like they're both objects rather than subjects. So I don't know if it's about the permanence as much as, well, I don't know. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
No, that's interesting too. That
No, I
that's
hear
also,
you.
that's an interesting element. I think it could be, that could be related. I also think another factor is that our concern isn't necessarily this thing lasting forever, but our concern is it lasting for the time for it to get to this person. So if something is written on your hand in like full on dye, if something is sharpied on you and you're not scrubbing it off, it'll probably last the journey to get to the woman. And actually, I think there's also a discussion in the Gemara of maybe, and I'm not sure if I'm recalling correctly, of if this applies only within Eretz Yisrael or also outside of Eretz Yisrael. Meaning, especially, let's just say we're talking about a short journey, right? It can last the journey, and then, especially if you're able to then call up Edim, and it was a callback to Rava's opinion that we want to have Edim who are able to ratify it, then we don't have a concern because we're able to then vouch that this was actually signed by those people, maybe. So if we're talking about the nitty-gritty halachot, there is what to say about it not needing to last forever. It just needs to last in maybe enough time to get to her. But that's a great point. So if we look back in our Gemara, as I said, maybe we can see that what's happening in the Gemara, what the Amorim are adding for us is this other statement of we really have to have the get. This is alluding to the idea that we really have to have the get. Like not only can there not be a gap between the writing and the delivery, but also that if you do it, if you were to do this act of severing the cow's horn, you might think that is the symbolic act of separating us, and it's not the get itself. I now want us to look at the Ritva here, where there's a whole complicated halach discussion that associates both the third Mishnah and the fourth Mishnah, and then also another case of like a potted plant, and that the get was written on. And the Ritva sort of summarizes part of that discussion. And he says here, Yad shel Eved, but he's specific, and I took the part that's talking about our case. Yad shel Eved, v'keren shel parau kuyotze bo, chashuv mechusar katzitza, kevan shema shemeshayer etzlo, hu ha'ikar, shishol chayut. So what he says is that the reason why this is problematic, why this cutting is problematic, is because what is left with him, meaning, right, you cut off the hand of a slave, and then you give the person the hand and you keep the slave. You cut off the horn of the cow and you give the person the horn and you keep the cow. The problem is that the thing that has vitality stays with you, and the other thing goes away. The kevan shemash nishar b'chayuto zeu ha'ikar, and because the thing that stays with you when you send the other part off, whether it's the horn or the hand, because it has its vitality with it, right? Because the hand is the person is still alive, the cow is still alive. That is the ikar. That is the main. That is the essence. That is the essential part of this object. And mishum hachi chashiv mechusar k'tzitza, and therefore it is a problem of cutting it off. The act of severing is actually considered a problem. Aval b'mshayer b'klaf o b'tavla kivan shekol shaveh sharei lekotzetzo achar ktiva min hadin. But if we were talking about a different scenario in which we say someone wrote and got on a huge piece of parchment and they just cut that part of the parchment off, because each part of the parchment is made out of the same stuff, and there is no essential difference between either part of the parchment, then that actually is mutter according to the Ritva. It's machloket. I believe the Rush disagrees with him, but that is, but I might be wrong, so don't trust me on that. But in that situation, it's actually okay to cut it off. And what I think is interesting here, and I will conclude with this, is the Ritva's language. If I'm going to try to read this right there, he's not speaking metaphorically here, right? He's talking about a very literal halachic category. But I think that we can maybe read this a little more deeply and see that the problematic case where cutting is a problem is not only that you have this act that you might think is doing the act as opposed to an act of divorce as opposed to the get like I suggested before, but also maybe when you are cutting off this part of something and then keeping the other part behind, maybe the issue is that you are and again, this is very metaphorical, take this or leave this, but that you are still hanging on to something, and maybe it's a display of the fact that you're not fully letting go of this relationship because you are hanging on to this thing that still has vitality. You're sending off the dead part, but you're still clinging on to part of it. And maybe there's an understanding here that you're still clinging on to part of this live relationship. And so paradoxically, the act of severing the horn of the cow or the hand of the slave and then keeping the slave and the cow behind for you is actually one of showing that you're not entirely cutting something off completely, which I think relates to like the I don't know if I would call it a truism because it may be actually, but the idea, the notion that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. I somehow I'm having a there's a connection for me between what I just said. I'm actually having a hard time talking out why. But that I guess it shows that there's still some sort of you're still concerned. The act of severing, even though that should be an act of
There's
hatred.
still a connection.
Exactly. There's still a connection that you actually solidify through this act of severing only a part of it, only this like secondary element of this whatever being you are severing, chas v'shalom in all cases, but you keep this other part back with you. And so I think that if we look at where the second half of this Mishnah that relates to the cow and the slave is situated, there's 7 mishnayot in the second parak, and I will be finished in a minute. There's 7 mishnayot in the second parak, and this is situated at the very end of the third Mishnah, which is roughly right in the middle. And as we discussed last week, looking at the middle of a collection of a Tanaitic collection can potentially illustrate to us some sort of overall theme. And so when I was looking at this, I was thinking that maybe this parak's central theme is exactly that of the importance of cutting things off fully and letting them go fully. As we discuss the technicalities of how a get must be delivered and how it must be written, the underlying message here is, again, that what the get is about is this full severance. And we discuss the technicalities and everything, but ultimately that is what it's all about. So that's my read of this Mishnah here. Thank you so much all for being here, for participating, and I look forward to next week. And please email me with any questions or comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you everyone who came. Thank you everyone who could stay even past the scheduled time. And I hope you all had a good time.
Thank you,
Take
Kayla.
care and see you next week.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.